Okay, welcome everyone. If you haven't done so, just go ahead and mute yourselves. Some people are going to be rolling in. We'll admit them as they come. Thank you for joining our Illuminating series for April. Today we have Woody English with us, and he is the co-chair of Oregon Advanced Directive Advisory Committee. He's going to be talking about advanced directives and the updated POLST. So we're super excited to have him. If you could please save your questions towards the end, feel free to put it in our chat box as they pop up. Nathan's also on. He's going to be watching our chat box, and we will hold the questions till the end. So we'll just start. Woody, take it away.
Well, thank you, Micah. And Nathan, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, we can
Yes?
hear you.
Okay, good. All right, well, I'll share my screen and we can get started. Okay, so I'm really pleased to have a chance to get to talk about this with you, and I hope that you have a number of questions about this. Working on the Advanced Directive Advisory Committee, we are very interested to understand where we can improve with the Oregon Advanced Directive. It has only been out for about 2 years and really only 1 year of sort of active solicitation for feedback from the public on it. And so this is a real opportunity for you to help us to make this better. So I'll go ahead and get started and point out that I'm a retired physician. I retired about 10 years ago. I'm now working with the Advanced Directive Advisory Committee, and for most of the time, since even before my retirement, I've worked with the POLST Coalition. And so I have a special interest in these two documents. As far as conflict of interest goes, I should probably point out that I'm on the board of Care Oregon, which is an organization that provides care for a large number of the Medicaid population in the state of Oregon. And House Call Providers, which has its own hospice, is a part of Care Oregon, and I've been on the board of House Call Providers for a number of years. I have no other conflicts of interest. I do want to sort of have you track what I say by pointing out some learning objectives. I really am interested that you understand the context for advanced care planning and the role of these two documents, the Oregon Advanced Directive and the POLST, so that you can use them properly. And there are some updates to the POLST, which are technical, and generally for the general public, it's not that important. But if some of you are actually helping people to fill out POLSTs, it would be important for you to know that. And most importantly, and this is for everybody, you really need to know how the Advanced Directive and the POLST work together, and that's really the message I want to hammer home in our discussion today. So let's get started. I'm going to take a historical perspective at first, and then we'll drill down into what advanced care planning is, and advanced directives and POLST play a role in that. Then we'll walk through the Oregon Advanced Directive and then talk a little bit about the POLST. So the history of all of this really started in the 1960s and 70s, and it came out of the understanding that with advances in healthcare, and particularly with the rollout of being able to do cardiopulmonary resuscitation and bringing people back to a reasonably functioning life sometimes after their heart has stopped, it soon became standard medical practice to do this anytime you found somebody down, and we started training the public on how to do cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And so if you were a patient and your heart stopped, more likely than not, you would have cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And that seemed sensible for a lot of people who are healthy, but for people who had terminal illness, people who were actually anticipating dying from their cancer or had Alzheimer's or dementia, it's not necessarily something that they would want to have. And so the legal profession teamed up with that and created a living will, which is really based on the legal format of a will. And this was supported by some widely publicized cases, such as the Karen Quinlan case, and pretty soon states began to adopt the acceptance of a living will and providing protection to healthcare providers who would not automatically provide cardiopulmonary resuscitation and life support to people, and could be protected from lawsuits that would challenge that decision. And so this has been a duet between the medical profession and the legal profession to make sure that if people want this kind of treatment or care plan, that it will be allowed, and the medical team can provide that without fear of harm back to them. The initial living wills were just like regular wills, a list of saying this is what to do and not to do. But it soon became clear that you needed more than just something written down on a piece of paper. So they started talking about a power of attorney for healthcare, or a healthcare surrogate. And this soon was incorporated into the living will documents. And so we started talking about this more as an advanced directive than a living will. And it really has two functions as it has evolved. It provides a way to guide medical care and to outline medical care when you're not able to be present, to tell the doctors and the medical care team what you really want, so that they need advice on how to conduct a care plan, a health care plan for you, and they need guidance for that. So the advanced directive will provide for that. If you get knocked on the head and can't talk, or if you have a serious infection and you can't talk, or if you have a stroke and can't talk, for whatever reason you can't communicate with your physician, your advanced directive will help the medical care team come up with a plan. The other function is to say that if you don't want cardiopulmonary resuscitation, if you don't want to be rescued from an active process of dying, the advanced directive process will say, okay, don't do that. That's historically how it started out back in the 60s and 70s. So it has these two functions, and it becomes really clear that these are separate functions, but they are married together. And that's really the burden of my talk today, is to show you how these two themes work together. In 1993, it became really clear in the state of Oregon that we did have a problem. We had a problem with the advanced directive in that the document could be taken to the hospital where you would be admitted, and the doctors would understand that. And then, let's say, probably the easiest way to do this is to talk about a particular case. A particular case might be a man in his 60s who has advanced prostate cancer, and he has an advanced directive or living will that says, I don't want cardiopulmonary resuscitation because my advanced prostate cancer is causing me a lot of pain. My bones are breaking. I really don't want to have cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So he's admitted to the hospital for some further treatment. The doctors at the hospital say, you have a lot of pain coming from the prostate cancer that's in your bones. We can treat that with radiation and your pain will get better, but we can't keep you in the hospital while you get your radiation. So you'll go to this care facility. So he's transferred then to a care facility. And from that care facility, he gets taken back to the hospital for the radiation treatments. And the hope is that when the pain gets better, he'll eventually be able to go closer to home or to a place that's not like the facility that he's in right now. So he's in the facility and he goes back and forth to the hospital on medical transport. And sometimes the medical transport is with an ambulance. And this actually was a case that happened here about this time and stimulated the transition that happened about in the early 1990s. So he's in the care facility and he's riding in the ambulance to the hospital and his heart stops. The ambulance personnel don't know that he had this advance directive because that was at the hospital. And so they started immediately to do cardiopulmonary resuscitation, which he said he didn't want. So he arrives at the hospital emergency department getting cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and it actually works and he survives, but it's not what he wants. He's in more pain, and therefore his advance directive did not serve him well. And if you could roll back further and say, well, what would have happened if his heart had stopped at that care facility? That care facility didn't have his advance directive either. And because that was set up in the hospital. And so they might have called the ambulance and the EMTs would have come and done cardiopulmonary resuscitation there. So it was clear that we needed to have an advance directive that would be available in multiple institutions, not just where it first started, and that something needed to happen in the ambulance. And what we discovered in that is that the ambulance functions under direct medical orders from emergency physicians, and they would always do cardiopulmonary resuscitation because that's in the protocol, unless there is a medical order not to do that. So a group of citizens and medical people primarily got together outside of the legislative process for the advance directive and created the POLST, which is the Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment, which is basically a medical order that could be implemented at the same time that you're admitted to the hospital. For example, you could put up a medical order that says, don't do cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So if somebody's riding in an ambulance and under those circumstances, and the automatic order would be to do cardiopulmonary resuscitation, there would be an order not to do it. So that would respect the individual's wishes, and it seemed like it would now cover the various circumstances. So both the advance directive and this POLST sort of emerged in the early 1990s, and the legislature passed a new advance directive, the Oregon Advance Directive in 1993, and the legislature also passed a law allowing for a medical order to be written that would accomplish this task. And that was given to another organization called the POLST, the Oregon POLST, which is now called the Oregon POLST Coalition, and they've been managing that. And so the rest of my talk is really going to talk about these two themes and what happened starting in 1993. So we have two documents. We have the Advance Directive, which is planning oriented, and we have the POLST, which is action oriented, and it's now called, used to be called the Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It's now called the Portable Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment, since not just physicians, but also nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and naturopaths can also sign a POLST order. And this is what they do. The Advance Directive will, one, appoint a healthcare representative. That's the power of attorney for healthcare, or the healthcare surrogate, but we call it the healthcare representative. And two, it's a place for expressing your preferences for a medical care plan. So it goes back to the initial part of what a living will is all about. And they come together to participate in what we now call shared decision-making, and I'll explain that in just a minute. The POLST, on the other hand, is a medical order which allows for the withholding of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It's basically a do not resuscitate order, and it provides direction in real time for supporting a person who may need critical medical care, just as in the example I gave. So what is shared decision-making? Because this is really important. It's part of the way we practice medicine these days. A person has a problem, a person goes to a physician or a healthcare provider. The healthcare provider says, well, here are several ways we can treat your problem. Let's talk about it. And those several ways are talked about. And together, the patient and the healthcare provider decide, okay, this is the plan we want to go, and they make a decision for a care plan. A clinical example of that would be back pain. Somebody has back pain and they take the back pain to the physician. The physician says, well, we could do surgery or we could do physical therapy. Right now, it's sort of one or the other, about the same. Let's talk about it. And depending upon what the patient wants to do, he could decide to go for surgery, could decide to go for physical therapy, depending upon what's important to him at the moment and how he weighs the risks and balances of that. So the patient is a personal expert in what they really want and the experience that they want to have. And the provider team is the clinical expert in saying, we know that this would work under these circumstances, and this would work under these circumstances, and these are the risks and benefits. And that's what shared decision-making is all about. So how does that all play? We'll pick up on that in just a moment, because really what happened was, as we were developing a more and more well-established shared decision-making model, the advanced directive really didn't keep up with that and didn't integrate well into it, whereas the POLST, and that was because it was written in legislation. In other words, the advanced directive in Oregon is written in the statute, in the law, and you can't change even the punctuation in it unless you have a new act of the Oregon legislature, which means that all the legislators have to agree on the language of the new law, of the new advanced directive. On the POLST, on the other hand, was set up through this Oregon POLST coalition, which doesn't require the legislature to approve the law, the language of the POLST or how the POLST is shaped. And so they continued to make incremental improvements. They would meet they meet several times a year, and every couple of years would come up with a new version of the POLST form. And every time they did that, they would have a big educational effort, and they'd also put out newsletters so everybody would understand that. So generally, not just the public, but both physicians and lawyers had a lot of information about how the POLST was changing, and the advanced directive just sort of stayed in the background, and nobody was paying that much attention to the advanced directive after a while. And people began to think, well, if I have to do advanced care planning, if I have to write up a document about what I would want, gosh, the POLST sounds pretty good. And they started using the POLST as a substitute for the advanced directive, which, as you probably could understand by now, wasn't really going to solve a lot of problems and probably has got people into some trouble. So in 2021, the legislature finally passed a new Oregon advanced directive to allow for more expression of preferences, to give greater attention to the role of the healthcare representative, and to clarify the role of the advanced directive with respect to the POLST. And that's where we are now. So here we go. The advanced directive deals with life-prolonging decisions that don't have to be made immediately, such as antibiotic treatment, nutritional support, lots of things like that, that will clearly save lives and carry things forward, but don't have to be made immediately and are almost always made as part of a shared decision-making conversation with the healthcare provider. On the other hand, the POLST deals with urgent implementation of life-prolonging measures, primarily cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and a decision to move somebody for medical rescue into a critical care unit. And those are often decisions that have to be made, as far as CPR is concerned, within minutes, if not seconds. So there's no time to have a conversation. And to be admitted to a critical care unit, usually people aren't there to have a conversation about it. You make a decision based on the medical algorithm for the decision tree about who should go where, given their clinical presentation. And so you would want to have a pre-formed medical order for making these kinds of decisions, and that's what the POLST is all about. So what is advanced care planning now that we've understood the background of how we got to this point? It involves discussing and preparing for future decisions about your medical care should you become really sick and unable to communicate. And the most important part about this is to have meaningful conversations with your loved ones. In other words, people who can speak on your behalf if you cannot be there yourself with a clear mind. because you can have a say in your care, and treatments only work if they work for you. And the doctors aren't going to know what would work for you unless you tell them. And if you can't tell them, then somebody really needs to tell them on your behalf. And sometimes a written document just doesn't do that. So we really want to focus the attention on the advanced directive as a preparatory document to help you establish a healthcare representative who can stand in for you should the need arise. So what is an advanced directive? Now we're understanding that it is a legal document. It provides for instructions for medical care, and they only go into effect if you can't communicate your own wishes. And they help you create your medical care plan by providing written preferences or instructions, which is really helpful. That's like doing your homework ahead of time. And then having someone, a healthcare representative who knows your wishes, participate in that shared decision-making model. And if you've done your homework right, it becomes easy for you to talk about these issues with the healthcare representative. So let's talk a little bit about the healthcare representative, because that's really where we're going with all of this. Just think about the advanced directive as an opportunity to come up with a really good healthcare representative. The healthcare representative is appointed in the advanced directive to make these decisions. He's required, or he or she is required to sign acceptance of in the advanced directive to say, yes, I accept this role. The healthcare representative works closely with the healthcare team to ensure that your care and treatment preferences are followed. So you really need to talk a lot about your wishes with your healthcare representative. What happens if you can't appoint a healthcare representative, or you just don't? Well, you may be happy or unhappy to know that Oregon law provides for this. You may not like what it provides, but let me point out to you, if you don't appoint a healthcare representative, this is what could happen to you. Well, firstly, what Oregon law provides is that a guardian takes precedence over anybody else if you have a guardian. But most people don't have guardians, and therefore it would fall to your spouse. Now, there's a subtlety here as far as spouses are concerned. Some people divorce or separate for reasons that aren't always with anger. They just divorce or separate because they've grown apart. But their ex-spouse still knows them the best of anybody, and they still have a respect for their ex-spouse, and they would want their ex-spouse actually to participate as a healthcare representative. And the reason I'm saying this is that Oregon law would say that your ex-spouse cannot be your healthcare representative unless you reappoint your spouse to be your healthcare representative after you've separated and been divorced. So that's really important. So the Oregon law will say if you can't speak for yourself, it would fall to your spouse. If you are not in the same mindset as your spouse, that could be a problem. If you don't have a spouse, or if your spouse declines to speak for you, then it would be an adult designated by others on this list. That would be 3, 4, 5, 6. If that isn't feasible, then it would be a majority of your adult children, which means that if you have 5 kids, 3 of the 5 would have to agree. Or if you are a minor, or if you are still survived by your parents, then either parent would be the next in line after your kids. And then if you don't have parents and you don't have kids, but you have brothers and sisters, then it would be a majority of your brothers and sisters. And if you had 7 brothers and sisters, then 4 of them at least would have to agree. And then if you don't have brothers, sisters, kids, spouse, or parents, then it would be an adult relative or adult friend. And the adult friend actually has been interpreted under circumstances as your landlord or landlady. And then finally, it would go back to the doctor who really didn't want to be alone in making these decisions. So you could see the doctor more or less would defer to anybody above the list if possible under some circumstances. So this boils down to the fact that if you don't have anybody to speak for you, it could be your landlord. And so I think most people would say, well, that's not acceptable to me. I would prefer to appoint my own healthcare representative. So that's what the Oregon Advance Directive does. It really focuses on helping you to choose your healthcare representative. And we'll walk through the Advance Directive right now. It has two ways of getting the job done. It appoints the healthcare representative, and you can appoint 3 of them, a primary and 2 alternates, but only one of them can serve at a time. And if one declines, then it would go to the second alternate. And if the first 2 decline, it would go to the third alternate. And the person must accept the appointment. And that person will stand in for you during the shared decision-making conversation. And then the second way for getting the job done is the historical way of providing written instructions, just like your will provide written instructions for distribution of your material assets. The Advance Directive will provide written instructions for your preferences for the kind of care plan you would want. And you can choose the options presented in a multiple choice form, or you can write your own narrative, or you can attach supplementary documents. And this can all become part of your Oregon Advance Directive, and I'll walk you through how that works. But it's important to know that the Advance Directive will work either with the first or the second, but it's probably better to do both ways. In other words, to have both a written document outlining your preferences and the appointment of a healthcare representative. So this is the structure of the Oregon Advance Directive, and I'm going to walk through most of these numbers 1 through 4 especially, and point out how that works. The first part is basically the demographic information that says who you are and how to find you. The second part says, okay, here's where you identify your 3 healthcare representatives and how to find them. Well, what's a good choice for a healthcare representative? Well, here are some thoughts. It would be somebody you're comfortable talking with, somebody who will honor your wishes and do as you ask, somebody who's trustworthy, somebody who can handle others' conflicting opinions. And this is really important because sometimes you may feel, Mary may know me the best, but Mary melts down when people challenge her ideas, and she really can't hold her opinion against a lot of criticism. That may not be the right person to be your healthcare representative, even if that person knows you the best. You want somebody with what they call, has what they call emotional intelligence, somebody who can really understand issues and advocate for you. After all, if you have somebody serving as a trustee of your money, you want somebody who knows something about money, right? And not somebody who's gonna just on a whim spend money here and there because it sounds good or they listen to some slick talking person. You want somebody doing your healthcare decision-making who really can stick to the kinds of ethical and emotional issues that will come up in making healthcare decisions. And then you want somebody who's willing and available to serve. And remember, it does not have to be a family member. It just needs to be the right person for you who can meet these characteristics for how you would want somebody to stand in for you if you can't stand in for yourself. And then just a reminder that you can have more than one. Okay. Section 3 is about writing down what you want. Historically, we've done this and we carry this forward in our current Advance Directive. We give you a couple of different clinical scenarios and say, okay, here's a multiple choice. This is how you would want to do it. And so it's outlined in this fashion. There are 3 scenarios. One is somebody has a terminal condition. somebody who has an advanced progressive illness, in other words, something like multiple sclerosis or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, or somebody who's permanently unconscious. And then you would say, under these circumstances, and suddenly I can't speak for myself, and I'm getting a lot of aggressive medical treatment, this is the kind of medical treatment I would want. And then you can check those boxes. Then there are parts to this section of the written instruction part of the advanced directive that allows you to write some narratives. And one of the questions is, what's important to me about my life? And it's a place to write about what you value, what is worth living for, things like that. And there's some guiding questions in there. It provides multiple choice options to get you thinking about what you would want. And then, and I really want to point this out, and that's why I put it in red and underlined it. What's important for me as I live my life, because that may seem confusing. And this just sort of lets you know a little bit about the sausage making that goes into legislation. The advanced directive that went to the legislature first came from a group of people that did not include somebody from the disability community, even though somebody from the disability community was supposed to be on the committee, and the governor was supposed to appoint a person to the committee from the disability community. The person who was appointed left that person's job and role and went off and did something else, and the governor did not reappoint somebody for that role. So the committee worked for 2 years coming up with an advanced directive without somebody from the disability community on it. And so it went to the legislature without that lens and guidance. And so when hearings started on the legislation to write the new Oregon Advanced Directive, which you may recall, I said actually gets written as a piece of legislation, which means that everything that goes into writing legislation goes into putting the words on paper that make the Oregon Advanced Directive. There was testimony from the disability committee saying, you didn't include things that are important to us. For example, if I require this as an aid to help me get around, or if I require this as help for me to be able to speak and communicate, or if I require this because that's the only way I can swallow my food, you haven't let the language that you're using would let people think that I that's just not important to me. And so we added this question about what is important for me as I live my life, because it's a place to put a narrative about what I need or I want to have in order to live the life that I value that I'm already living. And it's just a reminder. And in our user's guide, which I'll point out at the end, we have a place where people with disabilities can go and get some advice about how to fill in this part of the advanced directive. So anyway, so that just explains what I was talking about. Then the next part about it is we really want information about your belief system, because serious illness and death are existential matters coming at a time when people often find strength in their belief systems. Previous advanced directives really didn't make a big emphasis on this, but because of the role that we have in palliative care and other ways we enter into shared decision-making with people with serious illness and end of life, and chaplains are often involved in that, we minister to the spiritual life of people now in healthcare. And it's important to have a place in the advanced directive that allows for that, because that ends up being very much part of the care plan. And so this is, again, a completely narrative section for people who want to use it. It has some open-ended entry concerning spiritual, personal, religious beliefs. And it's an opportunity also, as I'm going to point out in a minute, where you can attach something. If you are part of a religious community that has very clear instructions for how you want to be cared for at the end of your life, put them in the advanced directive. There's a place where you can attach these kinds of documents. And then that becomes part of the instruction that would go to your healthcare team. And then there are others open-ended questions where you can write out narratives and attach documents. It points out there's a specific place where you can say whether or not you would want to be receiving care in a particular location. The statute requires that we have that in the advanced directive, and it's helpful, but I don't want to give an overemphasis to that, just pointing out that that's a statutory requirement. And then there's this wide open space for just adding any documents you want. Some people may move from another state and already have their advanced directive done, and they just want to make that work in Oregon. All you do is bring it in, attach it to your Oregon advanced directive, and it's part of your advanced directive. You don't necessarily have to rewrite it. If you happen to like another format, like 5 wishes, fill out your 5 wishes format, put this in, attach it to your advanced directive, and it's part of your Oregon advanced directive. The reason that's important is that the legislation says that the only legally recognized advanced directive in the state of Oregon is in, quote, substantially the same form as this document that appears in the legislation, which means that if you change this in any minor way from a legal point of view, it's no longer considered valid. So it makes sense to say that if you have something that you like, just bring it in. We placed an opportunity for you to put it here, just attach it, but then fill it out and witness it, and have all the rest of the format substantially the same, and there will never be any question about it. And then finally, because of HIPAA, which says there's something called protective healthcare information, anybody going to get healthcare these days knows that you have to sign off on saying who can receive your healthcare information. If you want your healthcare representative to play that role for you, for example, to be able to have your doctors talk to people other than your healthcare representative, then you're empowering your healthcare representative to say, okay, yeah, you can talk to Aunt Margie, you can talk to John, his third cousin, and so forth, so that there can be free flow of information with the appropriate people to support you. And then the rest of it just is boilerplate for signing it. You now can have it either notarized or you need 2 witnesses there to witness your signature. So, you know, technically the signature should all be dated on the same day. If you're writing it on Tuesday the 3rd, then the notary should be signing it on Tuesday the 3rd, and the witnesses should be signing it on Tuesday the 3rd, because they're witnessing the fact that you're signing it on Tuesday the 3rd. And then the healthcare representative needs to indicate that they've accepted their role, and that can be in any honestly common sense form. For example, let's say the healthcare representative was unable to actually physically sign your healthcare, your advanced directive, and you're now in the hospital, and the nurse calls up the healthcare representative number 1 and says, would you accept the role of being the healthcare representative for John? Who's my patient. And the healthcare representative says, yes, I will. The nurse just says, I spoke to John I spoke to this person on the phone. He agrees to be the healthcare representative, and writes it down, and that's good enough. So what do you really need to have a valid advanced directive in Oregon? Well, you need to fill out these red things: who you are, your signature, and get your signature witness. That's what you have to do. And then to make it work, you have to have either a healthcare representative, your medical preferences, or attach whatever you want. If you have an attachment that's perfectly good, you don't have to fill out these first 2 things. You just put your attachment, but make sure you sign it and get it witnessed. If you appoint a healthcare representative, then you certainly would like to get your healthcare representative to sign off on it before they're called into action. So in addition to the advanced directive, we also have a user's guide, which what you can't see up here is it emphasizes having continued conversations with the healthcare representative over and over again. That's really what's important. It gives suggestions for people with disabilities. It has a table to show the difference between the advanced directive and the POLST. It advises when to review your advanced directive. It identifies the kind of people who can assist in filling out the advanced directive, and it provides a wallet card. There's an example of the kind of information you'll find in the helpful information and practical information you'll find in the user's guide. It says you should consider updating your advanced directive if you have any of the 6 Ds. Every 10 years, the death of somebody that you may know that prompts your thinking, oh, now I see what goes on. I'm going to rethink my advanced directive because I've learned something. Or if your healthcare representative dies and is not able to fulfill that role. Disagreement, if you discover that your healthcare representative has kind of moved into a different direction and no longer thinks along the same lines you do, or maybe you've had a change of heart, then you should revisit your advanced directive and maybe reappoint your representatives. Again, divorce is an issue, and I talked about that earlier. If you have a new diagnosis, that's an important time to think about, well, where does that take me? And is my advanced directive really fit my needs at this point? And particularly if you're discovering that your health is in decline and you're requiring a whole new way of thinking about what's necessary as you live day to day. So now we're going to move to the POLST. This is what the POLST form looks like. Remember, it's a medical order. It's really very simple. Here's what it does. It says, do cardiopulmonary resuscitation or don't do cardiopulmonary resuscitation. If you say do cardiopulmonary resuscitation, then you have to check this box to say it's full bore, full treatment, all steam ahead. It doesn't make any sense to say attempt resuscitation, but don't put me in the intensive care unit and don't put me on a ventilator. That doesn't make sense at all. On the other hand, if you don't want cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but you're not at the point where cardiopulmonary resuscitation is required, but you're in the emergency department and they want to know, well, where do we go from here? Then this would help them to decide what kind of treatment to give you in the emergency department and where should you go in terms of which units or bed in the hospital. I'm going to show us a little video clip here that talks about when's the right time to do a POLST. It takes a minute to load up. There we go. Can you all hear that?
Betty and Jack have been married for 45 years. They love spending time with their 2 sons and their families who live close by, and they have worked hard to build a happy life together. Betty has many friends and interests and has always valued her independence. It's important to her to state her opinions about things that matter to her.
Hey, thanks, family, for being here today. This means a lot to your mother.
Some time ago, when Betty was in good health, she decided to complete an advanced directive. She did it so that others would know what treatment she would want if she were to be in an accident or taken ill suddenly. An advanced directive allows people who are in good health to give basic instructions about the care they want. It also allows you to name someone to make decisions for you if you're too sick to speak for yourself. Betty named Jack as the person to make her medical decisions. It's easy to complete because you can fill out the form and sign it on your own. An advanced directive is not a medical order. Some years later, Betty was diagnosed with cancer, and she had serious complications from the treatments. Now that she was much sicker, she realized that her advanced directive was not enough to make her medical wishes known. She needed a POLST. It's easy to confuse the difference between an advanced directive and a POLST. POLST is for people with serious illness who want their wishes to become medical orders that must be followed in an emergency. The medical order states the care you would want if you had an emergency today. You complete a POLST with your doctor or nurse practitioner and you can change it at any time. Your wishes are recorded on an electronic POLST form and you receive a printed copy to take home. You also receive a POLST magnet to put on your refrigerator so that people know you have a POLST form. A POLST lets you choose what treatments you do and do not want. For example, Betty does want to go to the hospital if she gets a lung infection, but she doesn't want to be in intensive care kept alive by machines. Having her POLST gives Betty great peace of mind. Years ago, she watched her sister die slowly and painfully, connected to many machines. Betty would never want that. For her, that is no way to live. Betty is also at peace knowing that her POLST lifts a burden off her loved ones because everyone is aware of her wishes. Jack will not have to make difficult decisions about Betty's care because he already knows what treatment she does and does not want, and her wishes are now written as medical orders in her POLST. Betty wants everyone to know how important it is to have an advance directive when you're healthy and then a POLST when you have a serious illness. She feels that having an advance directive first makes it easier to have a POLST later. Knowing she has taken a burden off her loved ones by having a POLST lets Betty focus on what matters to her most, enjoying life and being with her family and friends.
So that pretty much sums up, I think, the relationship between the POLST and the advance directive. Just a few things to point out that there are a couple of things that are unique to Oregon. Firstly, we have the registry, and that's important for everybody to understand if you do have a POLST. The registry provides real-time implementation of the medical order. The EMTs in emergency rooms have immediate access to the registry. So within a minute or two, if the ambulance is called, they will call the registry, find out if you have a POLST, and then will act according to the medical order in the POLST. And it needs to be in the registry to be fully functional because that's where they're going to know to look for it. If it's not in the registry, then you really don't have a POLST. The registry will reject forms if they're not completed properly. Sometimes physicians or nurse practitioners don't fill them out exactly correctly, and then it will be sent back to them to be completed properly. If that happens, you won't get a confirmation letter to say that your POLST was entered into the registry. So if you do have a POLST, expect to get a confirmation letter. If you don't get a confirmation letter, then go back to your provider and say, where's my POLST? Also, you should know that the POLST purges the forms after 10 years. So if you fill out a POLST at the age of 55 and you're still here at 67 and you haven't done anything on your POLST, and you want your POLST to be active, you need to know that you have to update your POLST. It's unlikely that that happens, but it's just helpful to know that's in the background. And then just to know that the POLST now exists mostly electronically, and the healthcare systems, if you go to a larger healthcare system, they'll fill out your POLST electronically. If you're a smaller healthcare system or a hospice, you can still fill out an electronic POLST, but you'll need to go to the provider portal through the registry to get the software and to get registered to be able to do it electronically. These are the other updates on the POLST, and I talked about this earlier. I'm probably too technical to deal with right now, but I really want to go over with you the difference between the advance directive and the POLST. And I'm sorry, you can't read at the top here. This is the advance directive in the middle column, the POLST on the far right. Who qualifies? For the advance directive, anybody 18 years older and above. And I think that, you know, it's good to have an advance directive when you get married. It's good to have an advance directive if you decide to ride a motorcycle. It's good to have an advance directive for a whole lot of reasons when you're young. So don't put it off to wait till you're old. On the other hand, the POLST really is something that should be filled out in the course of undergoing all sorts of medical treatments or having a diagnosis that calls you up to say, okay, I just need to deal with my mortality. And that's really when you need to complete a POLST. Remember that the advance directive is a legal document. It takes an act of legislature to create it, and it's a form that has to be filled out properly. Medical order, the POLST is a medical order. All you do is need to tell the doctor or your healthcare provider what you want. They fill it out and take care of it. You sign your advance directive. You don't sign your POLST. Your healthcare provider signs your POLST. They may ask you if you want to acknowledge it, but you don't sign it. It's not yours to sign. And none of these require a lawyer. You keep your your advance directive, and you give copies to your various healthcare providers. The POLST is kept by your providers, and they will send you a copy. They both can be changed at any time. And this is what's really important, and what I've tried to emphasize all along. In the case of a medical emergency, your healthcare representative speaks for you, honors your wishes and discussions, and if you've written things down in your directive, that will be entered into the discussion with your healthcare team for coming up with your care plan. In an emergency, the medical care team just goes to the registry, finds the order, and follows it. And to wrap this up, and again, my real emphasis on this is for you to have a good healthcare representative. And so think of this in the process of the shared decision making. And how does that really work? If the goal is to have a good shared decision making, then you need an understudy who needs the opportunity to practice your ideas and talk with you about it before opening night, because the advance directive isn't about a piece of paper, but it's writing your script and preparing your trusted decision maker to be ready to perform if and when needed. And that's really the way you should think about your advance directive. The advance directive actually is available in 13 languages in Oregon. It has a user's guide. This is what you'll see online, this section here, and you can download it. The important thing, if you search for this online, go to a website that has oregon.gov in it, oregon.gov. You'll notice this has oregon.gov. This has oregon.gov. If you just Google Oregon Advanced Directive, you may get sent to Colorado or California or New York, because there are lots of organizations around the country that will want to help people with advanced directives. And they will have a document that might be the old Oregon Advanced Directive or something that's sort of boilerplate that some people in Oregon have tried to use, and that's what's in their file, and that's what they'll send you, but it's not the Oregon Advanced Directive. So if you go online to search for it, make sure that whatever source you're getting your information from has oregon.gov on it. It's pretty easy to do, but as you know, when you go searching things online, lots of things will pop up before the site that you really want to is really clearly in front of you. As far as the Oregon POLST is concerned, just Google Oregon POLST. Their website's fabulous, and they'll tell you lots of information about the Oregon POLST. So finally, I'm ready for any of your questions. I hope I've left enough time. I sometimes talk too much, but I tried to address most of the issues that I think most of you probably would be interested in. But Micah or Nathan, are there specific questions that have arisen?
There aren't any questions that popped up in the chat box. If anyone has something.
Looks like some hands are being raised. Do you want to call on them?
Here we have some. Let's see. Becky.
I have a question about my husband and I'll be 80 this year. And the two of us are in good health. We have an advance directive. We've had it for a long time. We also filled out a POLST in 2011. And we filled out, and after 10 years, we filled out a new one. The reason we have a POLST at a younger, quote, younger age is because it has a medical order. If we were in an accident or anything like that, there's no time to wait for a healthcare representative to come and prevent CPR or anything like that. Even if I were in the hospital, I'd have to wait for the doctor's order. I'm a retired nurse, and there were times when patients needed that they had an advance directive, but the doctor had never signed an order to allow no CPR or anything. And I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want my ribs broken or things like this when that's not what I wanted. So that's why we filled out the POLST, even though we were healthy reasonably. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to address that. Becky, I think you're right on. That And the reason we don't emphasize that is that a lot of people don't fully understand the subtlety of what you're talking about. The subtlety of what you're talking about is that you are an extremely well-informed consumer. You really do understand what cardiopulmonary resuscitation is all about. You've thought about this, and you realize that life after that is just not acceptable to you. And therefore, you would rather die than suffer cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Not everybody has that level of understanding and sophistication. And to have a public message that people should fill out the POLST when they're really healthy does not make sense. That's not good public policy. On the other hand, you're not alone. There are a lot of surveys of where physicians are on this, because physicians have the same level of understanding that you do. And physicians fill out their POLST too for the same reason, because they know what cardiopulmonary resuscitation does to people, and they decide, I just don't want that. And even though I'm living a good, healthy life, I just wanted to be clear that if my heart stops, I've had a good life, I'm ready to go. Don't do that to me. But you can't expect the public to understand that. And therefore, the public messaging is, don't do the POLST until you have a medical condition where you've had a chance to experience healthcare. You've had a chance to get inside and understand what's going on. And then you become a more sophisticated, more informed, and more capable decision maker for whether or not a POLST is right for you.
Thank you.
We had a question in the chat box. It said, how to identify if my directive is most recent? To clarify, how do I know the form I've used is the most recent?
If you've, let's see. Firstly, if you filled it out within the last 2 years or 3 years, and you got it off the website, it should be the most recent form. If you just picked it up somewhere, then it should look like the form that you're going to be sending out, Micah. You're sending out to everybody, right?
Yes, the follow-up email will have a recording of
Yeah.
this and 3 documents that you've referenced. So everyone has access to it.
The 3 documents that I'm sending to everybody are firstly a copy of the most recent advance directive. So you can see if the advance directive you use is the one that you're getting from Micah. If it's the one you're getting from Micah and it looks good enough relative to what you already have, or what you have looks good enough compared to what you're getting from Micah, then you don't need to necessarily redo it. But if you redo your advance directive, or you want to attach what you currently have to the new advance directive and just get that signed and witnessed, then you can easily do that. So you don't necessarily have to rewrite it. But that's how you would know that you have the most recent Oregon advance directive. If you have an Oregon advance directive from 15 years ago, it's still valid in Oregon. It's not invalidated because time has passed and we have a new one. It's just that the new one has modern enhancements to it. It's like buying a car that will now help you drive on the road and not drive off the road because it follows the white lines on the road. You can still drive your car. It's just that you don't have the bells and whistles that come with new cars now. And so the same thing's true with the Oregon Advanced Directive. So you'll get an Oregon Advanced Directive, you'll get the user's guide, and you'll get just a copy of the POLST form so you can kick it around, look at it. You'll notice that it's blanked out, or there's letters over where the signature of the provider is, so it can't be used as a POLST form. Nobody can forge that. The registry would reject it. But so you can have it just as an educational piece. So anyway, those are the 3 things that are coming out. And if you have questions and whatever, get in touch with Micah. She can get in touch with me. Go ahead.
There's one more question that popped up. It says, my healthcare representative lives in another state. My alternative lives nearby. Can the nearby person be the one whose signature is witnessed? Or is it just my signature witnessed on the advance directive?
Okay. I want to be really clear about this because I understand. I'm reading this that there could be some confusion. So when you sign your advance directive, your signature needs to be witnessed. It needs to be witnessed by people who don't have a vested interest in your advance directive. So having your healthcare representative witness your signature does not make sense and might invalidate it. So don't have your healthcare representative witness your signature. It's easiest if you have a notary witness your signature, or if you don't have a notary, get two people who aren't connected with your healthcare and aren't your healthcare representatives. If you have a healthcare representative who lives close by, have them sign the document because it's convenient and easy for them to do that. If you have a healthcare representative who lives far away, you could ask them to send you a letter that says, I accept the role of being your healthcare representative, and they can be attached to your advance directive. And so that should take care of it easily. Okay.
And I know we're short on time right now, but there's one more that says, are ambulance drivers required to look at POLST?
Ambulance drivers now routinely check the POLST registry if there's any question about whether somebody would want cardiopulmonary resuscitation or not. The advantage of getting the information back from the registry is that they do give you a magnet to put on an obvious place in your residence that says that you have a POLST. And they also give you another piece of paper that say you have a POLST. And if you're in a care facility, or if you're in a place where people know you and they know that you have a POLST, if the ambulance comes, you can say this person has a POLST. There are some people that actually put tattoos on their body, so the ambulance people would see that they have some request, but you don't have to go to that length. But generally speaking, they will check the registry if there's any question as to whether the individual might have a POLST.
I have a
But
quick
it's helpful to
question.
give them
There's
a
time.
cue. I'm sorry?
There's time for a quick question. Is the medical directive considered a healthcare power of attorney? I've had
Yes.
that question asked, do you have a healthcare power of attorney? And this takes care of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's just the old language that comes from the will. When you fill out a will, you get a power of attorney for your finances. So they took that language and applied it to healthcare. But we're trying to make a distinction now, and we don't use that term. We just say healthcare representative is that person, and your advance directive document is your will.
Right.
Okay. Is that
And
it?
I did put my email in the chat. We will be sending out an email to everyone the same way that you got the link for the recording of this for today. But any future questions, feel free to reach out to me and we can get you in touch with Woody.
Okay.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Woody, for your
That
time.
was very good.
Bye-bye.